Thank you. I could have shortened the title to the story because really today I'm going to, delighted to be here. Today I'm going to tell you a story really about having Alzheimer's disease and being somebody with Alzheimer's disease and what can we do about it. And like all good stories, the story is evolving. And the story is about a person, but it's also about all of you because everybody here is contributing to the story, and that's really important. And the end of the story is getting better. It's one of these stories that doesn't have to end badly. The story is getting better. So, I want to talk about ageing, and I'm going to do this very briefly. We know that we have more people now than ever before, and we know that we're living longer. And because we're living longer, we have more degenerative diseases. So our cells are getting tired and maybe not working as well as they should. And we've discussed all of this before, with Alzheimer's disease and dementia being the most common neurodegenerative disease. So that's where cells in the brain simply don't work as well as they should. And the prevalence, so the number of cases of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, is increasing so much. And it's increasing so much because we're living longer. And they say every 3 seconds there's a new case of Alzheimer's disease, and that's really quite extraordinary. And the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease is doubling, or dementia is doubling every 20 years. So dementia, as you know, is an umbrella term, and that umbrella term covers lots of different causes of dementia, with the most common one by far being Alzheimer's disease. So what is Alzheimer's disease? And I know I've discussed this at previous conferences, but it's so important to get the multi-domain part of Alzheimer's disease right. So it's a degenerative disease that's continuous and progressive. So it doesn't stand still. You don't get Alzheimer's disease 1 year and 10 years later. It's a completely different disease. And it affects us in many ways. It affects our memory. It affects our short-term memory. And somebody might say to me, I don't get to choose what yesterdays I keep and what yesterdays are deleted. So just for a minute, think that if you're here now and that you're not quite sure tomorrow whether you remember it or not, you simply don't get to choose. So this progressive short-term memory. You've progressive difficulty, we call it the 4 A's. You can have progressive difficulty with your language. And again, somebody can say, if they're able to verbalise, they can say, I can see the words are hanging there, and I can't reach them, they just won't come out. And that's again very difficult. They can have difficulty with their everyday activities. So, the whole comfort of getting up and knowing how to go and make a cup of tea or knowing how to put on your clothes or knowing these simple things can become a challenge, and that's very, very difficult. And then you can have difficulty recognising objects or things or people. So, again, somebody can say, you're sitting here in front of me and I don't know what day is going to come when I no longer recognise you. So for a minute, just try and think if you are that person and you know that this is the pathway ahead, but you also know that there's a wonderful group of scientists who are going to work extraordinarily hard to try and lessen the impact, the daily impact of having Alzheimer's disease. So Alzheimer's disease is chronic and progressive. And we have many ways of assessing Alzheimer's disease, and really it's in the story. Tell me what you're having difficulty with. Tell me what you can remember. Tell me what causes you a problem day to day. And today I want to very much concentrate on the collateral story as well. So what does your loved one say about you? And what they might say about you is that, my husband can't get dressed as before, and actually he was always really happy and whatever, but now he's quite cranky and now he doesn't sleep as well, and there's a change in behaviour. So there's a change in memory, behaviour and activities of daily living. So the clinical history and the story are always going to be paramount. And yes, we've other ways. We have lots of fantastic neuroimaging for imaging parts of the brain that are very important for memory. And of course, we have new sets of biomarkers coming on all of the time. So biomarkers at the moment, CSF, which is fluid from the spine. We check biomarkers in spinal fluid. But then there's new sets of blood biomarkers coming online as well. But to be honest, they'll never replace the story. What is the story? I talked a few years ago about a movie called Still Alice, and actually as I was getting this talk ready, I looked at Still Alice again, because this is a younger woman who is a professional, top of her game, who develops Alzheimer's disease. And for a moment I just thought, actually, that could so be me. That could so be me tomorrow not finding my way home and forgetting my dinner arrangements and having such a huge impact on all of my relationships around me. So the story that we get from other people is also so important. So tell me what has changed. Take time. So I have a brother who's an orthopaedic surgeon, and he can't understand why I don't see 40 people in a clinic, but he has to see 40 bones. I have to see 40 people and actually take, well, not 40 people, much less people, and take the story. So the story is altogether important. And we have all of these, both famous and international people who've developed Alzheimer's disease, and the language that's used is always really about how they were robbed of the person they knew. So Robin Williams, his wife, wrote a fantastic article. It was called "The Terrorist Within My Husband's Brain." And it talked about her husband fighting demons, so fighting demons in the way of hallucinations and paranoia. And all of these people took over his mind, and the person that she knew changed as a result of this progressive dementia. And then we have people like Barbara Windsor and Sean Connery, where they talk about Alzheimer's disease almost being a punishment because each day brought new changes. So it's a huge difficulty for people living with it, and it's a huge difficulty for everyone who knows somebody with Alzheimer's disease. And I was updating this data when I was getting the talk ready for this time, and there's over 950,000 people now in the UK with dementia. And really, if I was to ask you, I'm sure at least 50 or 60% of you here have been affected in some way by somebody with dementia, either somebody you know or a close family member. And they talk about that for every person with Alzheimer's disease, that another 3 to 4 family members are affected in their everyday life. And the average cost, and this is just reality, what the cost of Alzheimer's disease and dementia in the UK is almost 35 billion. So again, if we stop for a minute as to why we should be taking this more seriously. We have a huge number of people with the condition. We know it's progressing, and we know that it has a huge personal impact, an impact in society, and a huge financial impact. So what are the risk factors for Alzheimer's disease? We talk about the reversible risk factors and the irreversible risk factors. So aging, unfortunately, as we all age, we are much more prone to degeneration of our cells, and particularly degeneration of brain cells. And we know that females are more at risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in later life. But we also know that 30 to 40% of our Alzheimer's risk is reversible. So lifestyle things such as smoking, excess alcohol, diabetes, and then cardiovascular risks, things like hypertension, high cholesterol, and of course we have to add in non-insulin dependent diabetes and diabetes in that group. But nutrition, we also know that and I'll be presenting that information to you, that countries that adhere to a healthier diet in general have much lower levels of Alzheimer's disease. So nutrition is hugely important. And of course we should mention social isolation after the COVID pandemic, or after people isolating for a long amount of time. Clinically, we noticed that had a huge impact on people's memory. They simply weren't using their memory every day. They weren't meeting people. They weren't using it. And they tend to deteriorate from that point of view. So lots of risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. So it's a degenerative condition in the brain. So the cells simply stop working. And there are many factors at play. It's not just the amyloid hypothesis. It's not just whatever. There are lots of factors at play that account for this neurodegeneration. So things like oxidative stress. Obviously, our brain is very active. Lots of oxygen-free radicals, inflammation, neurochemical imbalance, so the chemicals needed for transmission of information become deranged, and then the abnormal protein production, amyloid plaques and tau protein. So lots of things contributing to neurodegeneration. And we also know that by the time you present clinically with difficulties with your memory and difficulty with everyday activities of daily living, that there's been lots of changes happening for a number of years. So we talk about the pre-symptomatic stage, the symptomatic stage, and then when you actually have dementia. So from the point of view of cognitive performance and functional ADLs, they are really in the symptomatic phase, but all of these changes, particularly if you measure CSF amyloid beta 2 particles in the CSF, you'll find that they're much higher in people with Alzheimer's disease. So lots going on before you ever present with the symptoms. And what does that mean for the story? That means that as far as the story is concerned, we need to be addressing issues now, and this whole primary prevention versus secondary prevention is hugely important, and nutrients plays a huge role in that.